come in, do make sure to sign in if you need to. I'm Hannah Garn, I'm one of the philosophy professors here on campus, and this is our first philosophy speaker for this philosophy department speaker series this semester. It is Étienne joining us from, do I say San Jose State?
Yeah,
from San Jose State, soon to be returning to Canada for the University of Ottawa, which is very exciting. Étienne graciously invited me a couple of years ago to join a group called FilmMod, which is the philosophy of content moderation group, which is really interesting because it's both philosophers and tech insider people. And so we talk a lot about content moderation, algorithms and personalization on all of the platforms we're all used to, TikTok, Facebook, Meta, Twitter, etc. And today Étienne's going to talk to us about something slightly adjacent to the content moderation debate, which is this possibility that interacting with these personalized platforms might fundamentally change who we are. So, without any more prelude, please join me in welcoming Étienne.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Hannah, and thanks for the invitation. And lastly, thanks for taking some time out of your day to just come to listen to me. So, my paper's title, Recommended Selves, Authenticity and Algorithmic Filtering. And then I was told when I was invited, make sure that your talk is not too technical and that the philosophical concepts and the concepts generally that you use are easily understandable by a diverse audience. So I thought that I would start by saying a little bit about what I mean by algorithmic filtering, because it is a technical term, but it's a term that describes something that I think you're all very familiar with. So I'm going to be very concerned in this talk about social media and the fact that social media platforms are algorithmically driven. What I mean by that is that quite simply, if you log in your favorite social media app, let's take TikTok as an example, you're presented with some videos, right? And then there's an algorithm that basically determines what you should see next when you're on it. So this is kind of a philosophical reflection about this. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the value of recommendations generally. I'm going to get to algorithmic recommendations in a few slides. But I wanted to start by kind of drawing attention to the fact that recommendations play a subtle but crucial role in our everyday lives. And when I mean recommendations here, I'm mainly thinking about, for instance, your friends or members of your family or people you trust recommending things to you, right? So we rely on recommendations to choose TV shows, the books that we read, the degrees, the majors that we choose, the schools you go to. At one point you decided you were going to go to UC Merced. Maybe someone has recommended this choice to you. Jobs, dating partners, when your friends introduce you to someone that you end up dating, oh, I think you'd be a good match. This is a recommendation. And this is very important in our lives, right? It's a very essential feature of our social lives. The testimony, and I'm using testimony here. That's, again, a little bit of a technical use of the term. Epistemologists talk about testimony like that. I just mean people giving you advice, basically. The people who know you well give you advice, and this is very useful to you, right? It helps you decide what suits you. Typically, we find some comfort when we have to make a decision, and then we can rely on the recommendations of the people we trust to make the decision. We have the feeling that we are not alone when making that decision. What is this idea of recommended selves that kind of gives its title to the paper? Well, recently there's some philosophers that have suggested that recommendations can shape us as moral agents. The recommendations that you receive have an impact on your moral life. The basic idea here is that in order to make good moral decisions, you kind of need to pay attention to certain facts and kind of not pay as much attention to other facts. And recommendations, whether they're come from an algorithm or from people, help you kind of direct your attention to take some decisions. But more generally, my idea here is that our past decisions and actions are arguably very important to who we are, right? Like what you've done so far in your life is something that we should take into account when we think about the kind of person that you are, what's your history. And my idea is quite simply, well, when we've made these decisions in the past, often they were influenced by recommendations And in that sense, we can say that recommendations themselves kind of influence who we are. They influence our self-constitution as people. They influence our identity. So we are, in this important sense, recommended selves. Okay. For the rest, well, you'll see. I'll go back to recommendations made by humans because I think it's always useful to compare algorithmic recommendations to the kind of recommendations that's made by your friends or your members of your family, the people you trust. But I want you to notice that recommendations are increasingly automated, right? They're increasingly made by technology. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the apps that you use in your daily life rely on what is called a recommender system. I'm going to say a little bit more about how those recommender systems work in the second part of the talk. So whether you're on Facebook, X, or Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Apple News, Amazon, Spotify, Netflix, Tinder, all of these apps rely on a recommender system. Because of this, some philosophers and also media studies scholars have pointed out that algorithmic recommendation has kind of settled deep into the infrastructure of online cultural life, where it has become practically inescapable. Some computer scientists describe algorithmic recommendation as one of the most obvious success of artificial intelligence put into practice, right? We spend a lot of time thinking about things like chatbots, LLMs, generative AI today, but algorithmic recommendation is a specific kind of artificial intelligence. And it's very, very present in our lives. So what is a recommender system? This concept that I've just mentioned. If we try to define it simply, we can say that a recommender system is usually a kind of series of algorithms that take a large set of items and determine which of those to display to a user, right? Like that's pretty easy to understand when you think about social media, for instance. Let's say you're on TikTok. There's thousands, perhaps millions of videos that you could see right now. And then something has to make the decision, okay, this is the video that you're going to see. And then when you swipe or you scroll down, you're going to see another video and another video and another video. There's a system that constantly decides which one is the best video to show you, right? So you take a large set of items, all the videos that you could see, and then the recommender system determines which one you're going to see next. So if we try to describe it a little bit less technically, phenomenologically speaking, so if we think about how you experience recommender system, we can say that they're algorithmic engines or just algorithms that determine what users sees first and next when they interact with a digital platform. Again, social media is pretty easy, right? When you open TikTok, there's a video that you're going to see first. And then if you keep scrolling, there's videos that you're going to see next and next and next and next. All of this is determined by a recommender system. The next tweet we read, the next song we hear, perhaps even the next person we date, right? The profiles that you see on Tinder are also selected by a recommender system. Okay, so what do I want to do today? Well, there's been a lot of work in epistemology and political philosophy that focus on things like online hate, the spread of hate on social media, misinformation, radicalization, polarization. All of this work is like extremely valuable in my mind. But I want to kind of focus on a different thing in my philosophical reflection, something to which I think philosophers have paid less attention. I want to ask the question, do recommenders prevent us from being ourselves? And can recommender systems also help us do so? And my central suggestion is going to be that recommender systems impact their users' capacity to bear their authentic selves. So I'm going to use the concept of authenticity today in both positive and negative ways, right? So this is not a full-blown critique of algorithmic recommender systems, although to be honest, a lot of what I'm going to say is very critical of current recommender systems. But I'm also going to finish the talk by sketching recommender systems that I think would be better for us from the point of view of authenticity. So here's the plan. First, I've just used a concept that's actually very controversial in philosophy, which is the concept of authenticity. And I'm going to try in the first part of the talk to tell you a little bit more about what's my account of authenticity or what I mean by authenticity. And it's very important for me to say this, that in this paper, I don't pretend to kind of like grasp the essence of authenticity or saying like, I have the best conception of what it is to live an authentic life. I quite simply want to develop this concept in a way that's going to allow me to apply it to recommender systems, to think about how these recommender systems might be bad in certain ways. So I'm going to offer what I call a partial philosophical account of authenticity, and I'm going to insist on what I call dimensions of authenticity. And if you're interested about what I think are other dimensions of authenticity that I'm not going to talk about, we can discuss that in the Q&A. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about recommender systems, but I want you to understand how they work. And then I'm going to develop two arguments that suggest that my first argument is going to suggest that recommenders are an obstacle to authenticity because they frustrate users' second-order desires. So that's another technical concept that I'm going to have to introduce. And then my second argument is a little bit more optimistic. I'm going to argue that algorithmic recommendation can facilitate self-understanding by inciting users to question their identity. So I think that your use of social media can actually lead you to question your identity. But there's kind of a caveat here. And the caveat is going to be that it's very hard currently for users to understand why they are recommended the things that they see. And in order for recommender systems to kind of facilitate self-understanding and self-discovery, I think that they would need to be more transparent, right? So I think users would need to understand better why it is that they are recommended the things that they are recommended. Okay. So 2 dimensions of authenticity. Here's my kind of partial account or minimal account of authenticity. The first thing that I want to point to is that although authenticity is, I say controversial, but I think it's a concept that's very present in the history of philosophy. It's also very present in everyday life, right? And I tend to think that when a concept is very present in everyday life, or there's some concepts that are very present in everyday discussion, and that tells us that people tend to value those things. And I think that's definitely the case with authenticity, right? We speak of people in everyday life, right? Not in the philosophy classroom. We speak of people who are true to themselves. We speak of actions that reflect who they really are. There's a certain way of being human, writes Charles Taylor, that is my way of being human. I am called upon to live my life in this way and not in imitation of anyone else. So there's this idea that there's kind of a real you can be authentic, and when you're the real you and you're not a phony, and you're true to yourself, then you're doing something good, right? You're kind of living up to an important human aspiration. I was in the drive to here. I was listening to the Daily, which is the daily podcast of the New York Times, and today's Daily is quite interesting. If you're interested in those kinds of things, it's about the Drake Kendrick Lamar kind of conflict that unfolded last year, and I was just struck again by the fact that one of the main criticisms that's been directed at Drake since the beginning of his career is that he's a phony. Right? So again, this is also a criticism that relates to authenticity, right? He's not an authentic artist. So again, this language is very present in everyday life. The language of inauthenticity is also very present both in everyday life and in philosophy. So I just gave an example from popular culture, right, calling Drake a phony, but if you read some philosophy, you're also going to find this language. So in a pretty influential article, a philosopher called Harry Frankfurt explains that persons, in his view, are beings who have the power to make some of their desires more truly their own and withdraw themselves from others. And when they fail to do so, then the corresponding frustrations are those suffered by a person whom it may be said that he is estranged from himself. So the idea here is that if you don't follow your kind of true desires, those that make you be the person that you are, in a sense, you're not being yourself, right? You're estranged from yourself. One of the reasons why the language of authenticity is quite difficult, I think, is that it's quite metaphorical, right? Being estranged from yourself is, of course, a metaphor. So what I'm going to try to do in the first part of the talk, and then should keep an eye on the time not to be too long, is that I'm gonna talk of 2 dimensions of authenticity, right? So I'm basically going to say I think that there's two things that you can do that can contribute to make you be your true self or be authentic. And the first dimension, I call it volitional alignment, is definitely going to relate to what Frankfurt says in this influential article. I say 1988, but actually that's the book that he published in which that essay is featured. But the essay is called Freedom of Will and the Concept of a Person, and it was published in 1971. So it was summarized by another philosopher called Marcus Rings in 2017, who says the following: an agent conducts her life authentically insofar as her second order and first order volitions align. She acts, I'm going to talk a little bit about this technical distinction. She acts on decisions that reflect motivations or commitments she wholeheartedly endorses. These choices are expressives of who she is in the sense that they express her undivided will. And here, Ring builds on a very influential distinction in philosophy between what Frankfurt calls first-order desires and second-order desires. So our first-order desires as kind of our spontaneous, unreflective desires, and then our second-order desires are those that we reflectively endorse. I still think this is a bit technical, so I'm going to take some time to explain this. If we wanted to say this in a very, very simple way, there are some things that you want, and there are some things that you want to want. Okay? Here's an example of that. I'm going to have another example on the next slide, but the classic examples used by Frankfurt is the example of someone who's struggling with addiction. Let's take nicotine as an example. You can be a smoker and be smoking a cigarette, and in a sense, you want to smoke the cigarette, but it's possible that you also wish you were not a smoker. Maybe you've tried to stop smoking in the past and you failed at doing that. So it also makes sense that although you want to smoke the cigarette, you would prefer not to want to smoke the cigarette, right? So you want not to want the cigarette. So in that case, the fact that you want the cigarette and that you're smoking, we could say that's your first order desires. And then the second order desire is the kind of evaluative stance that you have on that desire. In that case is that, well, I would prefer not to have this one, right? So you want to smoke the cigarette, that's your first order desire, but you also want not to want the cigarette, that's your second order desire. And what I'm trying to say here is that one way in which you can understand authenticity is when your first order desires and your second order desire align, right? In the case I've just given, they don't align because you're smoking and you'd prefer not to be a smoker, but we can imagine a version of you that successfully stopped smoking, so then you don't want to smoke, and you also want not to want to smoke, so in that case, there's no problem, right? You're not a smoker, and you also think that that's better for yourself, so you kind of, when you think about your desires, you're just like, that's good that I don't want to smoke. And that's one sense in which we can understand authenticity. So here's another example, nothing to do with smoking, that I think is going to illustrate what I'm trying to say quite nicely. Imagine a frustrated and disengaged lawyer who chose her career merely to please her parents. While the lawyer fulfills her professional obligations, right, she profoundly regrets engaging in this life path. What she truly wants to be is a painter or a philosopher. The lawyer wants to be a lawyer, in a sense, first order desire, sufficiently so at least to be one every day, right? She clocks in 9 to 5 every day, so in a sense she wants to be a lawyer, but she does not reflectively endorse this desire. When she sits down on her couch at night in her apartment, she thinks about her career, she would rather not be a lawyer, right? She thinks that that's not a good thing for her to be one. Deep down, she knows that good lives are lived by people who dare to resist parental directives and forge a path of their own. To live an authentic life, the lawyer would need to quit her job and give her best shot at painting. Okay, some implications of that first dimension of authenticity that I'm trying to talk about. When we successfully align our first and second order desires, we take steps toward becoming our authentic selves. One feature or one implication of what I've said so far, if you accept that aligning your desires like that helps you be authentic, it makes authenticity aspirational. It makes something like an ideal. Authenticity something like an ideal. What I mean here is that the person that we really are is a person constituted by our second order desires, even when such desires fail to direct our will. So in a sense, even if you're a smoker for many, many, many years, If you would rather not be a smoker, that account or my account implies that if you were not a smoker, right, because that's what you truly want, you would be more yourself in a sense. Okay, some people might disagree with that. They might be like, no, actually the real you is the smoker if you're smoking. So being who we are partly amounts to becoming who we want to be. Okay, second dimension of authenticity, which is a bit less technical, I think. What I'm suggesting in the paper is that in order to be authentic, you need to engage in self-understanding. You kind of need to understand who you are as a person. To live authentic life, we must construct second-order desires that suit us, right? The preference that we reflectively endorse. I don't want to be a smoker. I want to be an engineer. I want to finish my degree at UC Merced. I want to be a good dating partner. I want to have children. All the stuff, the desires that we come up with when we kind of engage in deep reflection about how we want our lives to go. This itself requires us to gather self-knowledge, right? Like when you're sitting down and you're kind of laying out your life plan, you're also trying to understand what is it that you want as a person and kind of what suits you given the personality that you have, right? And different kind of life suits different people. So to identify the root of her malaise, right, the frustrated liar, she first needs to understand that she does not reflectively endorse her desire to please her parents, right? She needs to, and that she needs to identify instead with that to forge her own path. You can imagine that the lawyer was frustrated for 2 years, 3 years. She didn't really understand why. She was just day to day in this frustrated situation. At one point, she sat down, thought about her life, engaged in self-understanding, and was like, I think it's because I don't really want to be a lawyer, right? You need to understand yourself in order to kind of construct the right desires and then live a happy life. So when I say self-understanding, and so far, I've kind of insisted a lot on introspection, right? I said you need to sit down on your couch and then you need to like think about what it is that you really want and what naturally suits you. And that's what we can call introspection, right? Like kind of turning the mind's light inward, we can say. I do think that authenticity involves a fair amount of soul searching. I think that, for instance, constructing desires that will lead me to live a happy life requires me to understand important things about myself. What are the environments that are best suited to my personality? When I'm doing what I'm doing right now, like which is like talking about philosophy in a group of people, do I like this? Right? If I didn't like this, then that's not the right environment for me. But I do like it, so I think it's the right environment for me. With whom do I like spending time? Right? Who should be my friends? What kind of person should I date? What kind of challenge am I giving to myself? Do I like climbing rocks? Do I hate climbing rocks? All of those questions really depends on your personality, and you need to understand that. And introspection, I think, can help you understand that. But it's not actually what I'm going to insist on in the rest of the talk. Because I think that philosophers have spent too much time thinking about the value of introspection, and perhaps they should think also about the importance of what others tell you. What you can learn about yourself when you engage in interaction with others. That's what epistemologists call testimony, right? Relying on the advice and insights of others. So we come to understand who we are in large part through the advice and recommendation of others. Friends and relatives who know us well are a crucial source of self-knowledge, and listening to their advice can help us reflectively endorse desires that will lead us to flourish when fulfilled. The example that I give in the paper, again, is a very concrete but hypothetical example. Imagine a mother having a conversation with her 22-year-old son. The 22-year-old son says, I want to be an oncologist. An oncologist is a doctor that's a specialist of cancer. But the son is very proud and very brash in his personality. And then the mother tells him, like, you know, if you're an oncologist, you're going to have to tell people all the time that they may be terminally ill. Do you think you have the right personality to do that, you know, multiple times per week or per month? And if the son is very proud, it's likely, increasingly, my sister-in-law is an oncologist, that patients, in the face of bad news, are going to question your judgment, right? Like, you have stage X cancer, here's what I recommend. Are you sure, doctor? I'd rather get a second opinion. I don't want this treatment. I'm going to go with my alternative treatment. If you're very proud and you react badly when people question your judgment, well, then maybe you should not be an oncologist, right? So we can imagine that in this sense, the mother says, I don't think it's the right profession for you. And let us say that the son realized that this is true. In that case, the testimony of his mother was absolutely essential for him to understand what he should and should not do with his life. Okay, so that's the part of the talk that focuses on authenticity. Basically, there's a sense in which you're more authentic if you align your desires, I'm claiming, and there's another sense in which you're more authentic if you understand what suits you naturally, and then you construct your desires accordingly. There might be other dimensions of authenticity that I just don't talk about in the paper. For instance, I think children are very authentic, but when we say children are very authentic, we often mean something different. I think that children are very authentic because they absolutely do not care about what other people are going to think about them when they dress in a specific way or sing in a specific way or play in a specific way. And you could say not caring about the judgment of others is a third sense in which maybe you can be authentic. So I'm not saying those are the only ways in which you can be authentic, but I do think that it's two senses in which you can understand what it means to be more authentic. Okay. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about recommenders, and then after having done that, basically I'm going to try to kind of show how the story I've told you about authenticity and the story I've told you about recommenders, I'm going to try to show how they relate to one another, right? It's not clear right now how recommenders impact authenticity in any way. So what are social media recommenders? I've talked a little bit about them in the intro of the talk. I want to say more things about it. How do they work? Well, to rank items, right, to decide where you're going to see what you log on social media platforms, social media recommender systems basically attempt to answer the following question. How did users similar to this user engage with posts similar to this post, right? So let us say that Hannah really likes a cooking video, and then the recommender might determine that me and Hannah actually share a lot of things. Maybe we have similar political orientation. We're both philosophy professors. We both live in California. So they might be like, well, Étienne is actually pretty similar to Hannah. So if Hannah likes the cooking video, it's likely that Étienne is also going to like the cooking video, and then they're going to show me the cooking video, right? Or if it is similar, maybe not exactly the same video, but if it is similar to the one that Hannah has just watched. That's how they function, essentially. Now, in order to answer this question, they basically look at what you've done on the internet, and especially on social media platforms so far, right? So that's what I mean by behavioral history, the list of actions that you've performed on social media platform, liking, commenting, sharing, stopping to scroll just to watch something, not stopping to scroll, just like passing a video. All of this is registered and influence what you're going to see on social media. So your behavioral history remains the weightiest factor for establishing similarity. What you view on social media, what I'm trying to say is what you view on social media here largely depends on what items users categorize as similar to you have already engaged with, right? So the recommender categorizes you as belonging to a group of people. It's going to look at the kind of videos that the members of this group have enjoyed watching, and as a result, it's going to show you similar videos. Okay, this is a bit technical. Basically, what I'm trying to point out here is that that kind of reasoning in which algorithms engage in, we can call actuarial reasoning, which is a technical term, but actuarial reasoning, if we want to relate it to something that's very familiar to you, or I think more familiar to you, is the kind of reasoning that people working for insurance companies engage in all the time, right? So basically, the idea is that we categorize you as belonging to a group. We gather some information about this group, and that allows us to draw some conclusions about you. So the structure of their inferences recommenders is roughly the following. Considering that users with property X have engaged with content of type Y, this other user with property X is likely to engage with content of type Y. Again, that's pretty technical, but the story that I've told about Hannah liking a cooking video and me being shown the same cooking video is a simple illustration of that, right? Me and Hannah are categorized as being similar. She likes cooking videos. As a result, I am shown cooking videos. An insurance company might engage in a similar reasoning, for instance, when they try to determine how much you should pay for car insurance, right? They're going to categorize you as being similar to other users. Oh, you're a 23-year-old male driver? Well, let's look at how often 23-year-old male drivers tend to have an accident, how much this costs us as an insurance company on a yearly basis, And that is going to allow us to determine how much we should charge you per month to be insured, to have your card insured, right? One thing that I want you to notice, though, that's going to be important for the rest of the talk, is that when humans engage in that kind of reasoning, they rely on meaningful categories with which people frequently self-identify, right? How old you are, whether you're male or female, non-binary, those are kind of things that, those are categories that we use when thinking about people, right? For instance, universities categorize their students when they try to think about how they should teach, right? Like, a lot of my students are first-generation students. That's a way to categorize people. Oh, there's first-generation students. But when machines create categories like that and group people together, they don't always use the categories that humans use, right? Thinking of people in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of educational history, in terms of economical status. Sometimes they're just going to construct categories that are relatively unknown and opaque to us, right? For instance, so machine-generated categories may not correspond to any known social representation. Similarity in age or gender might be less salient to a recommender system than the fact that a group of users recently bought a novelty sweater, for instance, right? And most importantly, for what follows, we don't really know, or we don't always know, what are the categories that recommenders construct, that AI constructs when it's categorizing people, right? No one knows why you precisely, that's a very important point, no one knows why you precisely are being shown this specific piece of content. If right now you take your phone out of your pocket, you open TikTok and you look at a video, if you're like me, at one point you've deleted TikTok, now you can't download it again. But if it's already installed on your phone, you should still have access to it. And then you're going to see a video, and then if you call TikTok and you ask their engineers, why am I seeing this right now? They're not going to be able to tell you, okay? They don't know specifically why you're being shown the content you are, because the way that recommender systems function is relatively opaque, all right? And important for my reflection is the fact that I think that has an effect on people, because people have a tendency to question the algorithm and be like, why am I seeing this right now, right? If you're a creator, you might also think that maybe you're shadow banned, for instance, and you might be like, I think I'm being shadow banned. In the social scientific literature, this is known as algorithmic folk theory, and it's just the idea that, like, when you place people in a situation where they don't know stuff, they're going to come up with their own explanations of what is happening. And sometimes those explanations are going to be right, and sometimes they're not going to be right, right? I'm going to give you some cases later that's an example of that. People try to understand why they're being shown, why their social media feed looks like that, right? And they don't really know, and they can't really know. All right, so I've told a story about, authenticity. I've told a story about recommender systems. Now I want to kind of bring those two stories together and tell you a little bit more about why I think current recommenders prevent people from being themselves or from being authentic. Can I ask Dan or Hannah how much time I have so I make sure I'm not too long? 15? Yeah. 15? Okay. All right. I'm going to really try not to take more than 20, let's say. Okay, so the first, section 3 is going to relate to the first thing I said about intensity, is a story about desires aligning, right? The smoker who doesn't want to be a smoker kind of stuff. And then the fourth part of the presentation is going to relate recommenders to self-understanding, right? So the importance of understanding what naturally suits you. So let's start with the third one. I think that recommenders threaten authenticity by design because they make it harder for you to align your desires, right? The things that you want and the things that you want to want. Behavioral signals, right? Like clicks, likes, comments, dwell time, so the amount of time that you spend scrolling, when you stop, when you don't stop, when you continue, how long is your total session on social media. All of this is going to have an impact on your feed. So that's the kind of main signals that the recommender uses to determine, this is what this user should see next. But a very important idea in my presentation, but that's an idea that also is very important in the philosophy of economy, is that how people behave is often a poor indicator of their second-order desires, right? So of the thing that they want to want. I'm going to give, again, a concrete example of this that relate to recommenders. If you're interested in this, this is an idea that was developed by a philosopher and economist called Amartya Sen in the 70s, who argued that a person's preferences cannot really be successfully inferred from their actions. And then here's a very concrete example of that kind of aligns with the little story about smoking that I've told you earlier. Whether a smoker is, imagine you're just looking at someone leaning back on a building kind of smoking a cigarette. Whether the smoker is joyfully enjoying a well-deserved reward, is perfectly content, yeah, this is my smoking break, feels good. Or whether this person is currently experiencing shame because they just bought a new pack and they're trying to quit. This is not something that you can know just by seeing them light up a cigarette and start smoking it, right? Just by merely observing behavior, how people behave, you cannot really understand what's their mental state and what specifically their desire. Sen says we need more than the mere observation of actual choices to infer people's underlying preferences. We need a peep into people's head. What does that mean? Well, I can walk up to the smoker and ask them, and then maybe through our conversation, I'm going to understand in what kind of state they are. And that's an important insight. It's a simple but important insight, and I'm going to apply to recommender system, right? Like if you're trying to decide what people want to watch on social media, and you want to do this well, you're probably going to have to ask them. But it turns out that recommenders are not really asking you what is it that you want to see. That's not completely true. Sometimes Facebook, for instance, is going to say, like, did you enjoy watching this video or not? But that kind of survey doesn't really impact algorithmic recommendation as much as the liking, the commenting, the sharing, how you scroll, whether you stopped or not. This is really what's going to influence what your feed looks like. So I'm trying to apply Sen's critique to recommenders here. Imagine that I scroll down a social media feed for a few seconds. I skip over a specific video, X, and then stopping to watch another video, Y, for 12 seconds. So I skipped over one, then I stop, and then I watch this video for like 12 seconds. Both videos were designed to catch my attention. I'd say they're very catchy. But only the second video, video Y, successfully kind of caught my attention. Because of this, that's registered, right? Recorded by the recommender, I'm likely to be recommended more videos of the second kind in the future, just because I stopped watching it for 12 seconds. But here's a bunch of stuff that could have happened. Maybe I actually really liked watching the second video, video Y, and I would like to be recommended more videos like that in the future. Maybe that's just what I like to watch on social media. Maybe I only watched the second video as it was eye-catching for some reason, but I don't really have a preference between the first and second video. Just so happens I stopped scrolling because it was catchy, but in the future, it doesn't matter to me whether I'm seeing more of one kind of video, whether the other kind of video. Maybe I only watch it, the second video, because it was eye-catching. Maybe I disliked the two videos, even if I stopped to watch one, and I'd rather be recommended videos of a third kind, right, that have not been shown yet. Maybe I watch Y as it was eye-catching. I believe that watching videos like X and Y is a waste of time, and I would rather be videos of a kind of Z. Maybe I was not watching, right? Maybe I just stopped scrolling, and because I was talking to my wife. But the recommender system thinks that it was actually watching. I was just like, we're just talking about what we're going to serve our toddler for dinner. Maybe I hate watch Y. I was like, really? Why, how can people watch these kind of videos? And I do not want to be recommended videos like Y in the future. The core of my critique here is that just by focusing on the fact that you stop watching the video for 12 seconds doesn't allow the recommender to understand what it is that happened, right? Is it this? 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 Right? Just by merely observing how you behave on the internet, we cannot distinguish between those possibilities. Just like when you watch someone smoking a cigarette, you don't really know what's going on. Are they happy? Are they ashamed? Are they stressed? Just by looking at what they're doing, you can't know this. So the implications is that current recommenders cannot track their users' second-order preferences as they primarily rely on behavioral data from which such preferences cannot be inferred. As a result, I think that they foster volitional misalignment, right? This is a perfect illustration of volitional misalignment, for instance. The recommender thing I want to watch more videos of kind Y. Maybe in a sense I want to watch that video, it's eye-catching, right? So I stop scrolling because I want to watch it, maybe. But maybe also I wish I did not lose time watching that kind of video. So I might want to watch that video, but I also want not to watch it. Yeah. I think this is especially bad considering that social media is addictive. If we didn't spend a lot of time on social media, it wouldn't matter that much, but a lot of us find that we spend a lot of time on social media. Maybe we spend too much time on social media. And because we spend so much time on social media, whether or not we're presented with content that we really want to see, right? When we sit down and think about what do I want from social media? What do I want to get? Whether or not the content that we are seeing matches this kind of higher order preferences, second order preferences, this matters, right? All right. Last part of the talk, and I think I'm going to be fine, and then we're going to stop for the discussion. This part is about self-understanding. It's going to rely on some kind of concrete examples, and I hope you'll find them interesting. So I'm going to start this fourth section of the talk by giving an example, a fictional example of a man called Hao. So imagine that Hao is a bisexual man in his mid-40s. Since his early 20s, he's been in a monogamous relationship with his wife, Jing. And as a result of being in a monogamous heterosexual relationship, Hao's sexual attraction to men has never really played a vital role in his life. Okay? Some of his friends, including Jing, know about it. Others do not. His bisexuality has somehow faded into the background of his daily life. Like many, Hao is moderately active on social media. While spending time online, he realizes that a significant proportion of content that he is recommended by the recommender system is targeted at members of the LGBTQ+ community. This makes his bisexuality more salient to him. He engaged in this kind of reasoning. Not only am I sexually attracted to men, which is something I've known for a long time, he thinks, but I behave online, right? I behave when I browse the internet like a member of the LGBTQ community. This is why I see all this content. Somehow the recommender picks up on this, and as a result of that, shows me more LGBTQ+ content. This experience arises in how a desire to present himself as a member of the LGBT community. He's like, maybe I should present myself as a bisexual man, and to explore his bisexuality. Now, like different philosophers of sexual orientation are going to have different takes on this case, and people are going to say like, Hao is not really bisexual because he's not acted on these desires. Some others are going to say, well, yes, if he has the desires, then he is bisexual. But the point is just that Hao is kind of drawing a conclusion about who he is as a result of engaging with a social media recommender. You might be like, this is a far-fetched case. But there's a real life case that like nearly perfectly matches this hypothetical case that I've constructed. So this is a journalist from the BBC. Algorithmic recommendation helped BBC journalist Ellie House realize that she was bisexual after getting more and more recommendations for series with lesbian storylines and bi characters on Netflix, and being suggested a playlist described as sapphic on Spotify. So she engaged with the recommender and she was like, oh yeah, well, maybe I am bisexual. And it was kind of a moment of self-discovery for her. So this is the more optimistic part of the talk. I'm eager to know what you're going to think about it. So what I'm suggesting is that through algorithmic filtering, Hao and House came to understand something important about themselves, and that reflecting upon the kind of content displayed to them, they envisioned the recommender's testimony as a valuable source of self-knowledge and use it to construct their social identity. This represents a significant way in which algorithmic filtering can help users become their authentic self, right? I said, well, in order to be authentic, you need to understand who you are. And I think that recommenders can help you do this. There's going to be a caveat that's coming soon. There's a difference between receiving advice from your friend and what Hao and House did, right? So someone could say, well, it's not exactly testimony. We can get into that in the Q&A if you want. But there's a sense in which Hao and House were provided with information that they use to make an important decision about themselves. Here's a worry. Hao's reconstruction of why he's recommended LGBTQ content might be a pure figment of his imagination, right? Because recommenders are opaque. We don't really know why you're recommended the stuff that you're recommended, right? The ranking of items on social media feed might be driven by the behavioral history he shares with others members of the LGBTQ plus community. So maybe the recommender categorized him as LGBTQ plus, and as a result, he's seeing the content. But maybe something else has been going on. We can't tell, really. It's possible, for instance, that the recommender knows that he and his wife live in the Castro in San Francisco, which is a heavily LGBTQ plus neighborhood. And maybe the recommender displays LGBTQ plus content because of geographical location. It might be the case. There's no way for How to know. Does this matter? Does it matter that How cannot really know why he's seeing this content? Will algorithmic recommendations necessarily prevent users from understanding who they are because it's fundamentally opaque? Maybe not, right? Here's an optimistic take on what happened. Well, How already kind of knows that he's bisexual. He merely uses algorithmic recommendation to reflect upon what it means for him to be bisexual. Is it something that I should make a salient feature of my identity when I present myself to others? Should I explore my bisexuality? All these kinds of questions. He can also answer this question even if it turns out that he was primarily recommended LGBTQ plus content because of his geographical location. It doesn't really matter, right? He can still decide that it's more important for him in his 40s and 50s to present himself as a bisexual man. I'm going to present another case that's supposed to help us, that I hope is going to help us see that it does matter whether or not the recommendation is opaque. I call this called Farah. It's a variation on the How case. Farah is a Muslim woman who was raised in a conservative religious family. She has always felt some discomfort with her relatives' conservative beliefs. While living abroad, Farah has befriended many progressive Muslims and now sees herself as one. She thinks, I'm a progressive Muslim. Like many, Farah is moderately active on social media. While spending time online, she realizes that a significant portion of content that is recommended to her is targeted at conservative Muslim women when she scrolls down social media. This annoys her and makes her identity as a progressive more salient to her. I thought I was a progressive Muslim, she thinks, but apparently I behave like a conservative one, and that's why I'm being shown all of this stuff on social media. This experience leads her to redouble her efforts to kind of surround herself with progressives and limit contact with conservatives, maybe including members of her own family. So we can easily picture a situation where Farah's explanation of why she's recommending conservative content is a figment of her imagination, just like we can imagine it being the case for How. As it turns out, she lives in Whitechapel, and Whitechapel is a heavily Muslim neighborhood of London. And geographical location is the primary reason why she's recommended such content. Like How, Farah might still flourish. Maybe her decision to surround herself with progressive is going to lead her to flourish. But it's still the case that those efforts are kind of motivated by the wrong reasons, right? There's absolutely no point in trying to suppress the conservative Farah if the conservative Farah never existed in the first place, right? She just imagined this thing. So very close to the end of the talk. While How's case illustrates the emancipatory potential of algorithmic filtering, right? Like, oh, maybe my bisexuality is actually more important than I thought it is for me. Farah's example helps us see that only explainable recommendations can really fully realize this potential, right? If we want people to use recommenders to discover who they are, it would be much better if they understood why it is that they are being recommended the content that they see. And generally, that's true for all recommendations, right? It's valuable for people to have access to informative recommendations to understand why people recommend things to them when they make decisions that will lead them to flourish. Here's a simple case I give in my paper. If I tell my wife, if my wife asks me, should I take this new job? And I tell her, yes, you should. It's an important piece of advice. We've been together for 15 years. She's probably gonna not think that my opinion doesn't matter. It would be much better if I told her, yes, I think you should take that job. It's a management position and I really see you as a manager. I think you're gonna be a great manager. Or I tell her, yes, I think you should take that job. You're gonna cut your commute time in half, right? Because then she can decide, maybe she's gonna think, oh yeah, the fact that Étienne sees me as a great manager, that's meaningful. He sees that for me. Or maybe alternatively, she's gonna be like, I don't care about my commute time. Like I'm listening to podcasts on the tram, and I really enjoy that. So if she understands why I'm making this recommendation to her, she's gonna be in a position to take a better decision. What I'm trying to say is kind of the same thing for algorithmic recommendation, right? If people understand why they are recommended the things that they are recommended, they're gonna make better inferences about their identity and they're gonna take better decisions for themselves. So we not only want to receive recommendations, but we also want to understand what motivates them. Here's the very last slide. I could go on for 15 minutes to explain what I mean by 1 and 2, but I'm going to stop here so that we cover a kind of enough time for the Q&A. The conclusions is something like, we need better recommender systems, right? I think that they could facilitate volitional alignment by offering users more control over what they see. So if we want to be sure that you don't think you're wasting your time on social media, we could ask you what it is that you want to get out of social media, right? What kind of video are you interested in seeing? It could be surveys. There's different options discussed by philosophers. Surveys would be the simplest, right? Maybe we should constantly ask you, are you happy with your experience of social media? Do you like this video? Do you want a different kind of video? Do you feel you're spending too much time on social media? Do you feel you're wasting time? Do you feel you're learning? All these kind of questions would help us structure your social media experience in a way that would be better for you to make sure that you kind of align your first order and second desires. And they could also facilitate self-understanding by being explainable. Maybe there should be an information button on every post that you see that you could click, and then the recommender would tell you, well, here's why actually you're seeing this content. It's because we've categorized you as belonging to this group, and the members of this group as like engaging with this type of video, so we thought that you might also be interested in that. So then you would understand basically how the recommender understands you. I'll stop here. I think that's enough. I hope that this was interesting to you. And then I'll be very happy to answer your questions in the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Étienne, would you like to take your own Q&A, or do you want me to moderate?
What is your preference? What is your second order desire? I can just take questions then, if that's okay with you. You can go ahead. Yeah.
First of all, I want to say thank you for coming out and giving the talk. It was really enjoyable. And I'm curious kind of how this idea of authenticity in social media would relate to something like advertising, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, I mean, this might be kind of outside the scope of what you're talking about, like, because advertising to me seems like it's designed to kind of implant these false desires into your head. So would those be more like just kind of like first order desires, or could it be that like even like influencing second order desires, and like how does that kind of play with this idea of like recommendation and like
Yeah, I mean, that's a smart question, so thanks for it. I mean, there's different ways that you could go. I think like the most straightforward way you can apply my critique to advertising, if you sincerely believe, and I think there's some good reasons to believe that like by seeing advertising, we may be led to like purchase things that we don't really want to purchase, right? And then you could say, well, we should just get rid of targeted advertising on social media. Oh, if you do that, you're going to take out the entire economic model that fuels them, right? Like, but I'm okay with the conclusion. Like, right, if your conclusion is the current way social media function is not reformable, and we just need something radically different in order to make sure authenticity is respected, I'm on board with that criticism, right? So you can be quite revolutionary. I guess a more reformist take would be something like, we should also ask you what kind of advertising you want to see to make sure that they're actually useful to us. And maybe some of you think, I don't know, I don't want to make this assumption, maybe some of you think that some of the advertising you see online are actually useful to you. Maybe you've bought things that you thought like, yeah, I wouldn't have known about this if it wasn't for the advertising. Yeah, but yeah. And also advertising are recommended to you, right? It's not this, usually the algorithm that recommends the post from other users is not the same as the one that's recommended advertising, but it is a recommender system, right? Just that focuses on ads, so yeah. Yeah.
Great, but first, thank you so much for this talk, it was really great. It seems like the focus was on how our second order desires, how we ought to have more control over the first order sort of behavioral stuff that we get, based on our second order desires. But of course it's bidirectional, and I think this is where it ties to the advertisement component, where the behavioral cues we get all around us all the time shape our second order desires. So there's a degree of, when we talk about maximizing or striving for authenticity, is there a relationship here to that veering off into something like being complicit or being ignorant because you've taken away a sort of crucial disjunct that allows us to see things that we might disagree with and, actively choose to disagree with them?
Can you say more about this?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So like, for example, I'm imagining, thought experiment time, right?
Yeah.
You could have a group of people, they're all working a job. Maybe it's a really inhumane job.
Okay.
But they've all been taught or trained
Yeah.
to love that.
Yeah.
So they're living authentically.
Yeah.
But maybe we would actually call that being ignorant of their situation.
Yeah.
Not even having the tools to strive for something else.
Yeah.
And the sort of social media recommender version of this is I'm trying to imagine a case where I'm only ever seeing things that, I want to see or in line with what I want to engage with. And everybody's walking around with that. Like, that feels like being complicit, towards the, is towards the right word?
Yeah.
Towards the companies that are, feeding all of that to us.
Yeah.
Have that control to then influence our second order desires and keep them in line, volitionally aligned with the world.
Yeah. Yes. I think I'm going to say some things about that. I think you're getting at something very, very important about authenticity. If you feel that what I say doesn't do justice to your question, then you can come back and I'll try to say. No, not at all. Not at all. One problem with authenticity, generally, is that, especially in the way that they construct it, it's all about second order and first order desire alignment, right? And some people might be like, well, you can still do that in a way that's going to lead you to do bad things or live a bad life, right? Maybe I'm like really rude to administrative staff, or like when I talk to people, customer service on the phone, and maybe when I sit down at home and I'm just like, do I want to be rude to administrative staff? Maybe I'm just like, yeah, I already want to be rude to administrators. I don't care about them, right? In that way, I'm aligning my desires, but I'm still a jerk, right? And then you can imagine some cases like that on social media where it might be that like I'm seeing a specific kind of content that matches my second order preferences, but maybe that's bad for me or bad for society. Maybe I'm consuming hate speech, thing that's relatively misogynistic. And I think that criticism is true, honestly. I think that like authenticity is always going to get you so far. Like usually the way out of that problem in the authenticity literature is to add like another dimension and be like, oh, well, to be really authentic, you also need to make sure that your second desire like relate to the common good, right? So and then you avoid all those cases because if you have the wrong second order desires, they don't relate to the common good, there's a sense in which you're less authentic or something like that. I think this is true. And I think like the important lesson to draw philosophically is that like I think authenticity is a relatively important normative ideal, but it's not the whole story, right? Like it's not because you live an authentic life that you live necessarily a good life, right? At the same time, that's a criticism of my talk, right? But like to try to defend what I've said so far, I also do really think that people care about authenticity. And I think that like one of the reasons I chose to write a paper about authenticity, which is a hard thing for me to do, I've never worked on authenticity before, is that this whole language, like I want to be true to myself. It's important for me that I'm not a phony, that I'm just like who I am. It's really important to people, right? So like I tend to think if people really value that thing, then we should take seriously the possibility that this has value. Although it's not the whole story, doesn't mean you're going to live a great life. So I think that like, I understand the sense of your intervention to say like, there might be some cases in which your desires are perfectly aligned, but you're still doing something bad, either for yourself or for others. Is that roughly what you're trying to say? Or does that do justice? I'm not sure I get the complicity part.
It does. I think I'm drawing on a relationship with agency here. But,
Yeah.
I totally get the component of like, maybe you're just a terrible person, right?
Yeah.
But there's the other case of maybe you're not a terrible person, but it takes away your agency
Yeah.
in, this complicated social system that we're in and allows other forces.
So do you imagine a case in which you don't have great agency even if your desires are aligned? Is that something like that?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to imagine if that's relevant.
I think it is. Like I was talking to Hannah before the talk, and we had some remarks that I think relate to this idea. So that's all. Some people are also going to care about what's the process through which you form your higher order desires, right? Like if you're in an abusive relationship and you really want to please your husband, and like you sit down on the couch and you're just like, yeah, this is what I want to please my husband, this is my second order preferences, some people are going to say yes, but the process through which you form that higher order difference is a history of abuse, and that should tell us that your higher preference is not good, right? That's another way of saying it's not, preference alignment is just not going to give you everything that you need for a good life. And then like it depends like what's your philosophical personality also, because one I think that's a very important criticism, but if you put yourself in a situation where you're highly suspicious of people's second order desires, that also often create a kind of unequal relationship between you and them, right? And then you become the philosopher who's telling them, I know this is what you want and you want to want this, but you're wrong about this, right? I've always been relatively uncomfortable with that position, which explains like the orientation of some of my work, but I also understand that it's the impulse, right? Because there's obvious cases where something fishy is happening, like the abuse case. Feminist philosophers have a lot of things to say about that, for instance. Yeah, this is great questions. Yeah. Hannah or the clown? Yeah.
So is the problem that the influence, that the targeting affects our influence on moral agents?
Yeah.
So wouldn't it just be kind of like, oh, well, if it influenced you, then well, right? It's just kind of like.
Can you give me an example of where that would happen?
Like, let's say that I like watch a YouTube video and it's about like, oh, I hate this group of people.
Yeah.
And it influences you to become like hate that group of people.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, well, your authentic self is like you're easily influenced by just YouTube videos that make you into that bad person.
Yeah. And then are you imagining a case where like the opposite could happen? Like, I don't know, I have some friends who think like YouTube should recommend like pro-climate videos. Like the argument should be tweaked for like climate change, and maybe like that leads us to be like better to the planet or something like that, but in a very unreflective manner. Is that like roughly the kind of case you have in mind, or? Okay. I'm committed to thinking that there's value in second order to first order alignment. So I would think to say like, maybe it's good maybe it is good for the planet if you're like led by the recommender to do something better for society. It would be better if not only you were doing that thing, but you were also thinking about the fact that you were doing that thing and telling yourself, yes, this is what I want to do, right? And like, according to my story, that would make you more authentic or something like that. Now, like, that discussion that's happening right now, I haven't thought about those kind of cases, but like inside me too, like theory is a kind of case where like maybe either you're authentic and you do the wrong thing, or you're not authentic and then you're kind of led to do the wrong thing. I don't know what I would say about those kind of cases. I would have to think about them more. But like what I'm trying to say is I do think there's some value in that like reflective standpoint, right? In just being like, you're not just doing stuff, you're also thinking about the stuff you're doing, and you're just like, yes, this is actually what I want to do, or no, this is not what I want to do. And then you try to like modify your behavior. Like I think it's an important part of human life and like flourishing. Yeah. Yes?
You go first.
No, it's okay, students first.
Okay. So from my perspective, social media was originally designed for connectivity.
Yeah.
And then now it's kind of evolved into an entertainment platform as well.
Yeah.
So if audiences willingly engage in algorithm-based sensationalism,
Yeah.
do the companies hold ethical duty to counteract these tendencies? Because I could see an argument in which it's based on the consumers.
Okay. I was going to answer your question, but can you say more about the last thing you said, that it's based more on consumers?
Well, to kind of quote what you were talking about with soul searching.
Yeah.
I think that it does rely heavily on a person's individual self to identify what best promotes the success of their first and second dimensional authenticity.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily believe that it's the responsibility of profit-based companies to assist you in that manner.
Okay, I see what you're saying. There's different, I mean, I disagree, but like there's different kind of cases that we can think about. Like first, like what I seem to be assuming when I'm framing the whole project is that when you actually ask people like, what's your use of social media like, and what are you seeing, and are you happy? I'm assuming that like a significant chunk of people are going to be like, no, I'm not really happy. I wish things were different. I wish I'd spend less time on social media. I wish I consume a different kind of content. If you could show me like a sociology paper that shows me that this is entirely false, I think like this project would be less important, right? I think that here's a try to an attempt to counter what you said. Like, well, maybe it's the responsibility of the users, and they're just businesses. They're trying to. I think that like humans are very prone to certain kinds of addictive behavior. I think, we can think about social media, we can think about gambling, we can think about the use of drugs or things like that. And once you know that this is the case, I think it's very bad as a corporation to try to exploit that vulnerability. I'm not sure that the best approach, I'm thinking of Hannah here, but like there's the reformist version of that paper which just like, yes, we should go to TikTok and be like, you should be better. And then there's a more radical version that's just like, they're never going to do that. So we just need to coerce them into being better. And like there's different ways that you can go, right? Like you can try to reform them. You can think that they're too big and we should break them up. So I think that like the practical upshots of the reflection are like, there's different things that you can do. I'm not comfortable with a position that just says it's kind of people's fault, right? Just like I don't think that someone who's like has a gambling problem should be left and to themselves, and I don't think that our approach socially should be like, well, it's kind of you making that decision every day to go to the casino and spend your paycheck. Sometimes people need help, and we should think socially about how we can get them out of situations in which they're doing stuff that they don't really want to do. I don't know if that answers well. Hannah? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
This question might be kind of redundant because I feel like it's kind of been hit on a couple times, but like these algorithms are obviously employed by companies that are profit-based. Their incentive is to keep you on the app so that they can sell you advertisements.
Yeah.
And so they're incentivized to feed you your first order desires because, like for example, like smoking, like the smoking cigarettes example, right?
Yeah.
Like your second order desire of like not wanting to smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
It takes longer to do that, whereas like your first order desire is very immediate, just step outside, smoke a cigarette.
Yeah.
If you go back to like an algorithm, which as you said is addicting,
Yeah.
they're incentivized to feed your first order desires,
Yeah.
not necessarily your second order desire. Because your second order desire might be, I need to stop watching videos, I need to get off TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know you talked about it a little bit. But like, what do you think about like how do you change the incentive structure so that like it's a profit-based company? How do you change the incentive structure to incentivize them to value second order desires?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there's this different thing. Like, we can think about the smoking case to talk about what happy. It's not like we didn't ban cigarettes, right? But like we try to like make people understand that like smoking is very bad for them, and we cut through a lot of bullshit that was coming from the tobacco industry saying like, oh, this is like amazing, things like that. We can have an approach like that about social media. We can talk about like how it's bad for you. Maybe we can like have some sociological studies that show that if you spend a lot of time on social media, your other social relationships deteriorate. So there's this kind of like informative approach. Or we coerce them into doing different things. Like maybe people should have the choice between different recommender systems, right? And maybe there should be like a governmental approach that say, well, no, you just can't decide one model of algorithmic recognition for everyone. You need to give them some things like that. Or I don't know, a techno-optimist would be like, well, we try to develop a different kind of technology that's going to bypass those platforms entirely. Like, I didn't talk about that, but like some people think that like the future of social media should be like, instead of going on Twitter, you like open ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT, like you've talked to ChatGPT a lot, right? Because that's conversational. And then like ChatGPT knows what kind of stuff you want to see and what kind of stuff you think is wasting your time. And maybe the social media content that you're saying is like mediated through ChatGPT. So I think there's different approach. I think that like as long, like here's what I really think. As long as the economic model of those companies is to keep you on the platform the long as they can so that they can serve you more advertising so that they make more money out of you, they're always going to have an incentive to try to serve you things that you don't really want to watch, but makes you stay on the platform. So maybe the solution is something like we make targeted like advertising, like we prohibit that, right? But like saying that in Silicon Valley, they're going to think I'm crazy, right? But like sometimes philosophers need to think about things like that. That's an interesting question, right? Like I haven't fully worked out the policy proposal that flows from this, but I think there's like different option. Yeah, in the back.
I guess this question might be a bit more heavier, but if you think social media platforms need to be, how do I say this? They need to have more of a desire to help people be more authentic and kind of stop trying to, you know, push for just profits and stuff. You think maybe it might be in society's best interest to make social media a public good or just increase regulation?
My answer to this is like, should Trump buy TikTok, right? Like, also, like my wife works for TikTok, so and I'm just like, I'm not sure I want my wife to work for Trump. For those who haven't followed the news, like Trump has set up a sovereign fund that could possibly lead to the purchase of TikTok. My worry, maybe that would give us more control about it. It depends under which administration. It depends on in which country. One thing, given my commitments that are completely different from what I've talked today, I worry a lot about hate speech. I don't have a like super pro hate speech stance, much less than the average American. And my main worry, like there's a bunch of other problems that would happen, I think, if we make TikTok public. Because if you make like a social media public, then the Constitution applies to it, right? So like when, I don't know, like TikTok or Facebook is saying like we should remove hate speech from our platforms, then you could be like, no, we can't do that anymore. This is a public space, right? And the Constitution allows hate speech, so you have to allow hate speech on your platform. So I don't know, this is a really tough question. I think like if we're gonna make social media platform, we're gonna nationalize them, we need to think seriously about how they're gonna be different than they are right now. And it's not obvious to me that they're going to be better. Maybe what we need is a different kind of social media platform where algorithmic recommendation is really different. Like if you ask me to compare some social media platforms that I think are better than others for society, like I think Reddit is way better than like, I don't know, TikTok or Facebook or things like that for different reasons. Or maybe we just need much smaller social media platforms. I'm not sure that nationalization is the way to go, but honestly, I don't reject it as an option. It's just like, I haven't read the case for it that makes my worries go away. Yeah. Other questions? Anna has been holding a question for a long time. Okay, do you want to go ahead?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of, I want to jump in actually. I was kind of surprised for you to say that the way in which our second order volitions are shaped is not something that you're really too bothered by. Because it actually seems to me that your proposal at the end is very in line with the Chrisman-Benson approach to reflective endorsement.
Okay.
Right? So for people listening, we have this concern, right? You've got your first order desires, you want to buy those shoes.
Yeah.
And then you have that second order desire, do I really want to buy them or not? You're like, yes, absolutely, I want to buy those shoes.
Yeah.
What if I could reveal to you that the reason why you had that second order desire is because surveillance capitalism served you so many ads of like famous people you look up to that you just caved and it became your authentic self. But I can tell you that story, right? And you're someone who's like, I really don't want to be the person I am because surveillance capitalism made me who I am. So for Chrisman and Benson, right, their sort of theories of autonomy, the fact that you have the ability to engage in the reflective endorsement of the acquisition of your second order desires is what would make them yours. So it actually seems to me that your solution here means you have to engage with those debates about Frankfurt's second order volition of you. Because you recommend your solution at the end is one of the solutions to this problem. Namely, can people reflectively endorse the process by which they came to have the second order desires that they do?
So, okay, here's a follow-up. In which way do you feel that what I say at the end either responds to that critique or aligns with that critique, or is insufficient to respond to it?
I don't think it's insufficient to respond to it. I think it's like, Etienne's doing Benson and applying it to recommender algorithms. That's cool. But then in the exchange with Grant, you were like, I don't know, I don't really want to get into that.
So I had the feeling, well, like, I mean, it was a humility response. Like, I had the feeling that my account of authenticity was not sufficiently elaborate to accommodate this kind of criticism. But it seems that like you have a more charitable interpretation of my framework, according to which, I mean, like, yeah. I would have to think a little bit more about the self-understanding part, right? Because that's the part about like constructing the right higher order, second order desires, right? Yeah, I have to think more about it, and also like I just have to read the papers you have in mind because I haven't read them, so I don't really know. This is a response from a tenured professor who's like I don't know, I haven't read it yet. Like, if 3 years ago I would have not said that, and I would have tried to look like my account was like perfect, but it's not. My papers are never perfect. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I was actually going to say that this kind of reminds me of a conversation we talked about a long time ago about like nudging, about like when is something too invasive by which to even consider it like a valid option or valid input for like your decision making skills, like when have you been pushed too far?
Yeah.
And it seems like this is almost like an addressment or addressing that too, where like obviously these algorithms are nudging us in ways that we don't understand. So you're saying like we need to give them other options of other algorithms, or we need to explain to them how these algorithms are nudging them.
Yeah.
And it's simply the case that I feel like there's two issues, where the first is that we have to expect these companies to just on goodwill say like this is how these algorithms are functioning.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's an economic disincentive by which for them to do that, because
Yeah.
I mean we're not talking. The reason it's taken so long to talk about this, despite these algorithms being present for so long, is because they don't want us to talk about it. They want to hold that economic incentive.
Yeah.
And then like the secondary aspect of this is it seems like you're trying to solve the issue of nudging through like the consent, where like we understand what the system is, so we can consent to the system, we use your algorithm, or you give us multiple algorithms, we choose the best one, and then we move forward.
Yeah.
But I think it's the case that a lot of these algorithms are so complex that the expectation of the average person to understand truly what they're engaging with in a level that allows them to make an educated decision is just simply like an unrealistic standard by which to put on somebody.
Yeah,
like that.
so like, and then we really get into the like, computer science literature about explainable recommendation and things like that. So like, first of all, like I'm not expecting, and I hope I'm not committed to the practical upshot of my paper being like, we need to ask social media companies to be nice, right? And I'm sure they're just going to be like, why would we do this? Like, we're making tons of money, right? Like, but like, there's different things that can happen, right? Like, first of all, like, we also have this conception according to which recommendation algorithms are secret and not shared, like the TikTok algorithm. I've read some criticisms, including by some computer scientists, that suggest that this is not true. If you go to like if you go to Rexis, which is like the biggest conference in the world in recommender systems, people from these companies are going to be there talking about the recommender. And then like one thing that you could do, there's different approach to explainability, right? Like some people try to keep the opaque recommendation system, which is the one that they use, and then they try to apply another algorithm whose function is to try to decode that algorithm, right? Like that's one way you can get at more explanation. Or the other approach is like explainability by design. Like that would really mean like replacing the recommender system or something like that. But it's possible, like, if you look at the European Union, like, which is like a group of countries who are like much, much tougher on social media companies, we could also decide as a society that we decide that like explainability is something that needs to be built in those systems if they want to continue to have access to our markets, right? So I think that like you can think about legislative or regulatory effort. You want to come back on this?
It just seems a little circular to say that we should use algorithms to explain why algorithms are so complicated to people. You think something so complex that the person doesn't understand it, so then you use an algorithm to explain it, but then that algorithm itself is of a complexity by which the person may not understand it, so then what, are we supposed to use another algorithm to explain that?
I'm not an expert. You would have to ask a computer system. I don't see it circular necessarily if it gets you what you want, right? Which if it allows you to understand or understand a recommender. But as I said, the other approach is explainability by design. You get rid of that second algorithm and you just make it so that any recommender that's built from the outset, you need to be able to understand a recommendation. So I just do think that there are some technical options. I think you're right to say that social media companies don't have the incentive to do so. But it's also up to us as a society to like decide what incentive they can and they cannot have. Yeah. Yeah. Dan had a question as one of those students. Yeah.
I was just wondering to what extent you thought that algorithmic filtering might have an effect on our first order desires, our own subconscious desires, essentially.
Can you say more about it? Like, I mean, like in a way, I think like some of the examples that I give, I think it does have an effect on our first order desires. Like, I think that like some catchy videos, like, wait to see what she responded to her boyfriend kind of video, like, and you just like stop for 13 video kind of stuff. Like, there's clearly instances in which like you want to watch that video because you've stopped. So I think it's pretty good at influencing our first order desires, right?
I was more thinking about like how it affects our views on people, groups of people, our own desires for what we might want out of life,
Yeah.
emotionally or emotionally.
Yeah. Like, then I wonder some stuff like, would this count as a first order desire, as a second order desire? It depends on the level of reflexivity. I'm not an expert, again. Like, I do think they are, like, you could argue, for instance, that like the use of social media is gonna lead you to, for your views of other groups, like is gonna influence your view of other groups. But then you would have to ask like a sociologist that like conducted those studies and can show you data, right? Like, if I don't want to speculate too much, but you know, like there's a whole literature about like it's making us more polarized. It's contributing to the spread of hate speech. It's contributing to the spread of misinformation. Then the question is like, is the spread of misinformation actually influencing people? I'm inclined to say yes. Some people are going to push back, but yeah. Dan?
Was there another? Yeah, go.
So I feel that much of 2D authenticity that currently permeates users of social media is guided by what they see online.
Yeah.
So how do you create a platform that reinforces 2D and 1D authenticity while not encoding users with like biased media that we deem as reinforcing within this model?
I mean, if I try to toot my own horn, I'm going to say, well, I think like making recommenders more understandable and giving people more control over recommenders is a good start. I don't know. I would need to know more about your specific worry. Like, do you have another specific worry that I've not touched upon that you think that we should address or something like that about social media? Like the last thing I want to say is like, once you've done those two things, we're done, right? Like we have the best social media we could ever have. It's just like I'm addressing some problems that I think are going on, but there's certainly others, right? I've said nothing about hate speech, misinformation, polarization, radicalization. Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna save a question related to explainability for dinner,
Okay.
but since we had a question about it earlier, I think I can do it in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So, okay, like you were saying, when we talk about explainable AI or explainable machine learning systems, there's there's like systems that are built to be explainable from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other more common strategy, which
Yeah.
is sort of producing something like a post hoc rationalization.
Yeah.
And maybe the convenient example of this today is like you ask ChatGPT a question, and then you ask it like, okay, so why do you think that? Why
Yeah.
did you give me that answer? And it will give you a rationalization
Yeah.
that is not what actually happened. But it can be like a line of reasoning that you can follow.
Okay.
And so one could imagine doing something like this with an existing recommendation algorithm
Yeah.
that gives you those sort of socially salient, human understandable categories, which are not how the system actually classified you,
Yeah.
but are things that make sense to you that you could interpret and then like act on.
Yeah.
And basically my question is, what's your take on that?
I mean, the first response, like, I'm also like, another thing that you could tell me, like, I'm going to answer your question, but like, that relates also to the exchange that I had with the students in the back. And you're just like, maybe a computer scientist can walk in here and be like, okay, Brown, the explainability that you're chasing, it's not going to happen. Then my conclusion would just be like, okay, then recommenders are just bad. And instead of better recommenders, maybe we need like, you know, something different. That's a bit quick because of course recommenders do allow us to do things that are valuable, which is to find some information we're interested in and like a pile of information. Going back to Professor Hicks' question, I think that like the kind of ChatGPT example that you've just given me is not helping us in any way, because like it's just going to lead us. The explanation that is given to you by ChatGPT or whatever other explainer needs to track the actual process, right? Like I'm not sure this is possible. Like now I have more doubt exchanging with you and the exchange in the back. I don't know if explainability by design gets you at that. Maybe it's just, because if it just gives you categories that you just can't make sense of, it's not going to be enough for you to understand what's going on. But the worry that I have about your case is that the post hoc explanation is not going to, if it doesn't actually track the actual process, it's just going to lead you astray, right? And then it's going to be Howe and Farah again, right? Where it's just like, it might actually be worse then, because then maybe Howe and Farah, in a sense, know that they're speculating, but if it's ChatGPT telling you what's happening, then you're probably going to think that you're in a better, right? Like, you may not know that you don't know, right? As Howe and Farah might know that they don't really know, to go back to Socrates. Does that make sense? Do you want to come back on? Yeah. Other question? This is a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much for this. I'm learning a lot. Happy to. Yeah, Hannah.
What do you say to the person who doesn't care about authenticity or doesn't buy that it's about a virtue?
It's okay.
Or a value?
It's okay with me. I'm just going to respond like, well, most people seem to care. There's so many self-help books about authenticity that you can buy on Amazon. You know, like that's the thing that I do, and I say this in the conclusion of the paper. I say like, why do you write this paper about authenticity? It's a weird thing to do, and like one of the response I give is just like, listen, the ethics of AI is already so technical, so technical. I don't know if this counts as the ethics of AI. I didn't present this as an AI paper. But it's so technical that at one point, the one way we can democratize this reflection is by using concepts that people care about, right? And there's a sense in which, like, I really mean it. Like, imagine you've known someone who struggled with addiction all their life, and then in the last 20 years of their life, they're clean, right? You can imagine their best friend saying, like, you know, I've loved you for all those years, but I'm so happy to finally meet the real you. Like, if you see this in a movie, you're immediately going to understand what they mean by the real you. And what they mean is someone who's aligned their desires, right? So, like, that kind of speech that you're going to see in movies that people use in everyday life, the kind of philosophy I want to do as a philosopher is a kind of philosophy that takes seriously those kind of sentences and those kind of conversations, right? So that's kind of why I talk about authenticity. I'm less and less and less interested, this is just my personality, in like philosophical discussions that like the layperson is going to be completely unable to like relate to, right? Which is like why I don't do like the meta-ethics of fittingness, right? And I understand some people want to do that, but that's why I wanted to write the paper about authenticity. Yeah. Yes, last question.
Yeah, so with targeted advertising,
Yeah.
and there like an alternative where there's no targeted advertising, just they throw you random stuff at you. And the example with the Muslim woman, where she becomes more progressive by the video, right?
Yeah.
If it was just random and it wasn't targeted, is that still like a same issue, or is it just like?
Wait, what kind of advertising you have in mind? Non-targeted advertising?
Yeah, it's not targeted. It's just you randomly got that video.
I mean, I think there's it's also, again, like you would need to know someone who's like has measured the effects of advertising, right? Which is like, I think like, I don't know enough about like the actual effect of advertising to say something smart, but it's possible that like if advertising is actually making you buy stuff you don't want to buy, it doesn't matter if it's targeted or not, right? I just think targeted advertising is going to be much more effective. Well, that's why we have it, because then like we have better information about what you might like, so we can present it to you. But yeah, I think that any kind of nudging or trying to influence people, then that's complicated. You start using expressions like non-rationally or by manipulating their agency is going to have a problem on the first condition, on volitional alignment, right? Then there's a whole debate to be had. People are going to be like, well, it's not that clear what you mean by non-rationally, or it's not clear what you mean by manipulating. Are there other cases that are unproblematic? But yeah, no, I mean, I think advertising could lead to volitional misalignment even if it's not targeted advertising. Yeah. Thank you.